We believe in building community because Silicon Valley is an aspirational ecosystem that attracts people from all over the world who come here to do great things. In fact, I'd like to know, who here is not originally from Silicon Valley? Great. Who here was born and raised in Silicon Valley? Congratulations. So whether you were born and raised here or you arrived here last night, it's important for us to provide multiple channels for you to meet people, build relationships, and grow your network, because networking is so important here in Silicon Valley. In fact, we have a regular event every few Fridays at the Hyatt Regency Santa Clara, TGIF, thank God it's Friday, Business and Social Networking. So we just had one this past Friday. The next one is going to be on Friday, April 7th. So you're all invited Friday night, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m., April 7th. Hopefully you guys aren't busy on Friday nights, but if you are not, come by and check it out. With regard to value, it's important we provide value at each and every one of our events. Not just value for your money, which is important because we know many, many entrepreneurs are struggling financially. So we make sure our events are affordable. If you cannot afford the cover charge, let me know. We are always looking for volunteers to help us manage our events. And we try and provide a decent buffet meal at each and every one of our events. Was this a decent meal? I prepared it myself. And if it's your only meal for the day, that's okay. We try and be here for you. And it's a buffet. You can also take some home. We have Ziploc bags. More importantly, though, we want to provide value for your time, which is your most valuable resource. Anyone here getting any younger? Probably not. So when you invest your valuable time to come to our events, we want to make sure that you maximize your ROI. We have many partners that help us do what we do: law firms, venture capital firms, angel investor groups, incubators, accelerators, colleges, universities, lots of other players in Silicon Valley. Tonight, we're grateful to the Toddy Digital Marketing for hosting us at this beautiful venue. I'd like to have Philip from Toddy come by and say a few words. Let's hear it for Philip.
Thanks, Rob. So I'm Philip Goldworth. I'm the CEO here at Toddy Digital Marketing. We're a small business, mid-sized business marketing agency that deals with pretty much the sort of the digital end of marketing for companies. So that's going to be their website, the website content. We also, part of the content side of that these days is going to be photography and video. So a lot of video has become a big part of content these days. So we actually have a full commercial photography and video studio on site here. We help some large companies as well. We also deal with integration of marketing automation tools. At the low end, it's things like Infusionsoft or HubSpot. At the high end, we're dealing with things like Marketo and Eloqua. Anyway, thank you for coming out, and we appreciate having Rob here, so thanks.
I'm glad somebody appreciates me. We have a few of our other partners here tonight. I want to have Mike from CTO 911 come up and say a few words. Let's hear it from Mike.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike with CTO 911. I offer CTO consulting services for startups here in Silicon Valley. I essentially help entrepreneurs put their idea together into an execution plan. Anything from the planning, the wireframing, design concepts, to creating the architecture, database models, execution plan, and then as well as building the team to execute it as well. I've been specializing in enterprise software primarily, and also been doing mobile applications, as well as data science and machine learning projects to share. So if you're interested to talk more about your ideas, and if you need help with anything in terms of the technical side, I'll be glad to talk to you after the event. Enjoy the event.
So though our local mission in Silicon Valley is to support entrepreneurs here in the Valley, our greater mission is to democratize entrepreneurship innovation all around the world. To that end, we have a robust YouTube channel, youtube.com/idea-to-IPO. If you go there, you'll see that we have tons of videos. We've documented many of our events, and this rich, valuable content is available on demand, anytime, anywhere, totally free of charge. It's whether you're in Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Maui, Moscow, or Timbuktu. So anywhere you have access to Wi-Fi, you have access to great content that we produce. So tonight, we are going to be videotaping this event. So during the presentation, we ask that you hold your questions. At roughly 8 p.m., we'll get started with the audience Q&A session. We'll have a mic stand set up here. Come up and ask your questions, and that way we can produce a quality learning resource that we can all use for a long, long time. Before we get started with the program, I want to take a couple minutes here to extend an invitation to anyone in the audience who's got an announcement. So maybe there's someone here in the room that wants to talk to you. Maybe you want to talk to them. Maybe you're looking for a position in an organization. Maybe you have a position in your organization. Maybe you're looking for a CTO or a co-founder. Or maybe you just arrived last night from somewhere and you want to announce your arrival. So who's got an announcement? Oh, do you have an announcement? Shalini. Stay there.
Hello everyone, myself Shalini. I'm looking for an entry-level positions in software industry. I have experience in software testing and database, and also quite trained in DevOps process. If anyone have any opportunities, please let me know. I'll be here. We can talk after the meetup. Thank you.
Hello guys, this is Frank, and I'm your cameraman tonight, so make sure smiling at me when you see me. And I just got my master's degree from Buffalo, New York, and I am the newcomer to the Silicon Valley. And I got my mechanical engineering degree, so I can do any mechanical design if you have any IoT thing or any products you need to design. And I also do a lot of computer vision and artificial intelligence coding. So if you need anything in programming, you can also let me know. And it's glad to know you guys here. Just talk to me after the event. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else has a quick announcement? Here we go, Barry.
Hi, I'm Barry Burr. My venture started out as Barry Beams, and now it's Oculus Lighting. I was using the name a few months before Oculus Virtual Reality. But in any case, we've successfully used angel funding over the last few years to have product, patent, people, and some profits. Now I'm back at a stage where I can either shuffle this off, keep doing it as a part-time thing, making and selling product, or bring in a second round of funding. And my investors are pushing me and willing to put more money in along with the next round coming in. But with all the experience I've had over the last 5 years, I literally could be the non-technical, technical party in on a, let's say, 5 to 50 person early stage, somewhat funded startup with my background in the computer industry, both electronics, mechanical, and technical, and software. Anyway, so lots of possible directions. My overall goal is, of course, to bring in revenue so I can keep this thing going. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Krishna. I represent an organization called Agile Entrepreneurs, agileentrepreneurs.com. We also, on Facebook, you can also find us by Agile Entrepreneurs. We're starting a bootstrapper. A bootstrapper is not an accelerator. It's a place where you go to learn how to build your startup on your own terms, and get to product market fit and positive cash flow with or without funding in 3 to 6 months. So we have our offices in Menlo Park, about 10 minutes bike ride from Facebook. Look me up, I'm here, or just send me a message via Facebook. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patrick Barron, and I'm a hobbyist who's with a CAD system and a 3D printer, and I've developed a few products that I've used, and I have a small group of people, my neighbors, that actually use them. Some of them look interesting enough that I want to sort of put them into production. And so I'm looking for any sort of pointers in terms of like a company that works in injection molding here to try to sort of transform a design from something that can be printed to something that actually has to be adjusted for injection molding. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. Thanks.
Okay, come on up. Brief and to the point. There you go, thanks.
Yep. Hi, my name is Bill Neville, and I'm here with a company called the Entrust Group, and we do what are called self-directed retirement accounts. So this presentation about crowdfunding and crowdfunding portals, if you want to know how you can utilize one of these crowdfunding portals and invest your retirement account into this, or if you're looking for funding and you want to find out how to tap into the roughly $7 trillion that are currently held in IRAs to invest in your startup, come talk to me and I'll explain it to you. Thanks.
I'll send you an invoice for that commercial. Just kidding. Anyone else? All right. Let's get started with tonight's program. So tonight we have an expert in the field of crowdfunding. He is definitely very, very knowledgeable. More importantly, he's passionate about helping entrepreneurs succeed. So let's give it up for Brian Becken.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming. And I have a mic on my jacket, so I think I'm good, right? Okay. And my wife tells me I talk too loud anyway, so if anyone can't hear me, I'd be really amazed. Okay, so I want to basically give an update, kind of, on crowdfunding. And let me just start telling you a little bit about my firm. I work with Cutting Edge Capital. We're based in Oakland, and we help our clients figure out the most effective way to raise capital based on their needs. There's no one-size-fits-all. There's all kinds of ways of raising capital. I'll go through kind of a survey of the different ways of doing crowdfunding. And tonight I want to talk a little bit about sort of what we're seeing in the field in each of those areas. I'm not going to attempt a comprehensive overview of everything that's happened in the last couple of years. It's a busy time these days in the crowdfunding world, but I'll point to some highlights of what we see as trends, and with a view to how effective these strategies may be for you. So I'm guessing that there's a good mix, mostly probably entrepreneurs in the room, maybe some investors. Who in the room is an entrepreneur that may be looking for capital? Okay, probably roughly half, maybe a majority. Who in the room is an investor interested in maybe investing in crowdfunding? Okay, all right. And then other folks, academics, just interested in the field, just want to learn more? Okay. Now, of those who are entrepreneurs looking at maybe raising capital, who's used some kind of a crowdfunding strategy already? Okay. Well, I was going to ask you like what they are, but I guess without a microphone, that the recording won't hear it. But go ahead and throw some out. What have you used? What kind of strategy have you used? Kickstarter. Okay. 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 Not entirely positive experience. Okay. Any others? You want to shout them out? Kickstarter. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So now, as I said, let me jump ahead here. Let's see. Okay. Crowdfunding is kind of a big field. There's a lot of stuff that fits within that umbrella term. So let me first just define what I mean when I talk about crowdfunding, because different people mean different things. So a lot of people tend to associate the term with Kickstarter and Indiegogo, but it's actually much broader than that. That just happens to be some of the most well-known platforms or strategies. So what I mean is simply a process of raising small amounts of money from a lot of people rather than one or two people providing all or most of your funding. And that, of course, is broad. It encompasses gifts, donations, pre-sales. It can also includes true investment. And now, people tend to think it's a new thing because, 10 years ago, who ever heard of crowdfunding? And some of the strategies are new. Let me talk about, let's see. Well, give me a second here. Some of these strategies that I'll talk about are new, but as you'll also see, that some of these have been around for a long, long time. What is new, sort of the common theme behind all the newness of crowdfunding, is that in the internet age, it's a lot easier to go out and reach a large group of people. But if you think about it, companies have been crowdfunding for not just decades, but hundreds, probably thousands of years. That's the way companies have raised capital Not always, but many instances throughout history. So there's a lot of newness to it, and I'll talk about which strategies are actually new in the last couple of years and which ones are really simply getting more momentum in sort of these recent years, but have actually been around a long time. Okay, so why would you use investment crowdfunding? Well, maybe just you say, why would you use crowdfunding in general? I'll get to the investment side in a minute. But generally speaking, people want to bypass the institutional gatekeeper. Instead of having to go to a bank or a VC firm who is going to call the shots, who's going to basically tell you what the terms of the investment are, you want to be able to go out to a broader group of people who would contribute, who would support you because they believe in you. That's really kind of your ideal, right? That's who you want as your investors. It's also a way to engage your community. So, if you let's just take, for example, a brewery. I love to drink beer, so I make a lot of references to breweries. If you're a co-owner of a brewery and someone says, hey, Brian, where is a good place to go get a beer? Of course, I'm going to say, well, go down to this corner brewery right here. And it's because I'm invested in them. The idea is that your investors make your best ambassadors. And if you're a customer-facing company, and for those who are, your investors also make good customers. But at any rate, it's a good way to engage your community. And then the third item up here, and this is the one, frankly, that drives me, is you're helping to democratize the system. And by that I mean you, by using the crowdfunding process, you can open up an opportunity for everybody to participate, everybody to support what you're doing, and if it's on the investment side rather than the donation side, if it's an investment, you give everybody an opportunity to share in the benefit, to share in the profits when your company turns a profit. You're not just funneling all those profits to a VC firm, to someone who's already rich, but you're sharing it widely in a community. And so there are some democratizing aspects of that I love. So that's why I do this work. It's the democratization aspect. But there are plenty of other benefits, and everybody can get their own sort of benefit out of the crowdfunding process. Okay, so now I talked about different types of crowdfunding. Let me just sort of go through them quickly, and then I'll go into one by one. Accredited crowdfunding, I'll talk about that in a minute. That may be an oxymoron. I'll tell you why in a minute. But the donations, rewards, pre-sales, that's what most people think of as crowdfunding. That's the Indiegogos, the Kickstarters of the world. Those are not investments. Those are essentially, you're either making a donation or you are pre-buying a product that you may get later down the road, or you're getting a mug or a t-shirt or something. So bands like to raise money on Kickstarter to fund their album production costs, like this rock band in Oakland called Atomic Bomb Audition, and it worked out for them. Now, peer-to-peer lending, that's another type of crowdfunding. It is true investment, but I put it in its own category because in some ways, peer-to-peer lending is from an entrepreneur's point of view, it's just like getting a bank loan. It doesn't have some of the characteristics of other crowdfunding types, but it is a type of investment crowdfunding, so it has its own category. Title III crowdfunding, this is one that's gotten a lot of publicity. It just came into effect this past May, so a little under a year ago. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It's a little bit of a wild west, so be careful there, but it is a good strategy if it gives you what you want. Direct public offerings is what my firm does mostly, so I'll talk more about that. And the good news is, I'll talk about it in a minute, the SEC has issued some new rules to make it easier to do direct public offerings. And then Regulation A, to sort of round out the collection, is it can be a type of direct public offering, but I put it in its own category for some reasons I'll explain in a minute. So that's sort of the big picture overview of the different ways to do crowdfunding. As you can see, there's 6 different categories, and most people don't know that most of those exist. So hopefully you'll come away with a better understanding of what your options are after today. All right, so let's dig into them. Accredited crowdfunding. Now there's a number of websites out there that do what can be called accredited crowdfunding. People use different terms like Circle Up, Funder Circle, Crowdfunder. What these do, these sites use it's really a type of private placement under SEC rules. It's called Rule 506C, but it does allow for advertising. You can post it on a website. You can talk to people that you've never met. And in that respect, it's very different from the classic type of private placement. But the catch to this legal strategy is that every investor in the offering must be accredited. Now, by accredited, I mean you have either $1 million in net assets, not including your residence, or you have $200,000 in income annually for the last 2 years and expect to have the same this year, or $300,000 together with your spouse. So there are different estimates of what proportion of Americans or people, residents in America, are accredited. I've seen estimates of as little as 2 or 3%. I've seen other estimates that say, fully 10% of American households are accredited. It kind of depends on how you count it. But the point is, it's a relatively small group, and it excludes a lot of people. Some statistics I saw suggest that there's a whole category of what are called the mass affluent. And these are people who have net assets, again, excluding the residents, net assets of between $250,000 and $1 million. So these are people who have significant money to invest. They're not within the definition of accredited, and they cannot participate in most types of private placements, which is how most money is raised in the US. So this is an untapped market, and I think I said about 26% of all investment assets in the United States are held by people in that group. And these are people who have almost no investment options. So it's wide open there. There's a lot of opportunity to raise capital from the non-accredited mass affluent. But anyway, back to accredited crowdfunding. If you want to raise money from accredited investors, this is a way that you can advertise and find them. So it can work. Now, update. These are offerings that don't require any regulatory approval. You do have to file something with the SEC, so you are on the SEC's radar screen. And so, when something bad happens, the SEC gets involved. There have been some recent instances. A company called S-Energy was shut down, as you can see, after raising some money because their financial statements were incorrect. They overstated. I think they claimed it was an oil and gas company. They claimed that their founder had more experience than he actually had. This caused the SEC to shut them down. And there are other instances like that. Another one, a company called Telspec was investigated. Now, I will say they were investigated. Apparently, they were cleared because the SEC issued a no-action letter. But the point is, the SEC is looking at this stuff. So if you want to go down this road, make sure you do it carefully. Make sure your disclosures are really good and accurate. All right. So next, now I want to get into what I would really call true crowdfunding. Now, the reason I earlier said that accredited crowdfunding might be an oxymoron is because when you're limiting it to the richest 2 or 3 or even 10%, that's not really the crowd, is it? But now we're talking about real crowdfunding. Okay, so donations and rewards. Now, this is the classic Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Donors Choose. There are many, many of them. These just happen to be the biggest ones. These are great. They work really well for raising smaller amounts of money, and they can help fund some seed needs, some startup costs. It's not as easy as people think. It's not one of those things. In fact, I will say this. This is probably an observation about all the different types of crowdfunding. It's not that easy to raise money. People sometimes think that if you build it, they will come. It doesn't really work that way. If you want to raise money via crowdfunding, you don't just put it up on the website and expect the money to flow in. You got to market it, whatever that means, whether it's social media, actual advertising, getting out and speaking to groups, finding affinity groups and meeting with them. You got to market any crowdfunding raise, because people aren't just going to automatically show up and start investing just because you put it up on a portal or up on your website. So this is in that same category. But this is an effective way to raise small amounts. Now, by way of an update, this has really taken off in the last few years. So I just saw some recent statistics showing that these kinds of crowdfunding donations have somewhat plateaued. So they were rising very, very rapidly for a number of years. It's kind of tapered off. It doesn't mean it's in decline. It just means that it is somewhat matured. Maybe the market is somewhat becoming more saturated. There are many, many campaigns, but as you see there, the statistics show that between the US and the UK, last year there are actually 17% fewer campaigns than the year before. However, the average amount raised in those campaigns is actually up. So the total amount of money raised in crowdfunding in this type of crowdfunding, continues to go up a little bit. One thing that's really significant is that while these sites like Kickstarter and Donors Choose, they started out primarily focused on donations, for nonprofits and arts groups and so on. There is now a little bit more of a shift toward the use of these for business purposes. You probably have heard about the crowdfunding raise for Oculus Rift a couple of years ago. I think they raised a phenomenal amount of money. People talk about it because it was such an unusual amount of money. It's not typical, don't expect to do it, but they raised about $2 million, and that was for a commercial company. So there's been a general shift toward more commercial use of these kinds of crowdfunding strategies. All right, so that's donations and rewards. Now we want to get into the true investments. And that's, to me, it gets more interesting. Because as long as you're dealing with just donations, pre-sales, and so on, you generally don't have to comply with any securities laws, because that's not a security. The security is this defined term in the law that says basically if it's an investment, it's a security. And it invokes this whole layer of regulation. So donations, don't have to worry about that. But once you get into real investing, where people expect to get their money back, expect to get a return on investment, now you got to pay attention to securities laws. Now, in peer-to-peer lending, generally speaking, the entrepreneur who's raising capital is really getting something that looks to the entrepreneur more like a traditional bank loan. And in fact, in some cases, it actually is a bank loan. If you go to Prosper or Lending Club, they both operate the same way. If you go get a loan from one of those sites, you actually are getting a loan from a bank called Web Bank. The bank then sells the loan to the platform, whether it's Lending Club or Prosper. It works the same way. And then the platform will then raise debt money from their investors. So the investors in the platform are actually not lending directly to you, the borrower. The bank loaned to you, the borrower, and Lending Club bought that loan, but then your investors are simply lending to Lending Club, and then they have this connection so that it's a payment-dependent promissory note. And so your investors, what your investors get paid back is dependent upon you making payments on your loan. So at any rate, that's kind of the way those work. A lot of them work similarly, but it is a good and effective way to raise capital. I got a loan via Lending Club a few years ago, and it was a good experience, and I think they've got a good thing going. Now, by way of an update, this is still a fast-growing area. Like with rewards and pre-sales, it is being used increasingly for commercial purposes, whereas originally it was, Lending Club and Prosper were strictly for personal loans originally. Now this type of strategy is being used more for businesses. So that may be good for those who are starting businesses and want to get an unsecured loan. These are typically unsecured, although that varies. There are some peer-to-peer lending programs that do secured lending. There have been some activity. I mentioned, a little scandal hit Lending Club in 2016. I only mention it because it got a lot of publicity, but I don't think it says anything of concern about peer-to-peer lending in general. It was just news, so there it is. But I think this is a solid way to raise money, and those anecdotal things don't concern me particularly. Okay, so that's peer-to-peer lending. Now we get into Title III crowdfunding. Now this is where we get into what you would really call true investment crowdfunding, in the sense that now you, as an entrepreneur, if you use this type of crowdfunding, you can determine the terms of the investment. You decide what you want to offer. No one's telling you, here's what I'm going to loan you this much at this much interest. Now you are saying, I want to offer equity, I want to offer debt, I want to offer a revenue share model. There's all kinds of things you can offer in this type of crowdfunding. Now, Title III crowdfunding it came out of the 2012 Jobs Act. JOBS stands for Jumpstarting Our Business Startups. So this is a relatively new strategy. Some of the others that we'll talk about have actually been around for a long, long time. This is one of the new ones. It's getting a lot of publicity because it's new. And so, inevitably, you sometimes see headlines, or at least when this first came out, actually went into effect in May, this past May. When it first went into effect, you would see headlines saying, now, for the first time ever, non-accredited investors can invest in local companies, which, is not actually true, because it has always been legal for non-accredited investors to invest in small businesses, but not many people knew how to do it. At any rate, this did get some publicity, and that's good for, from a point of view of, again, democratizing the economy, opening up opportunities for more people to invest in something they believe in, something local. Now, there are some issues with this, and I don't mean fundamental flaws in the law, but here's the thing. To use Title III crowdfunding, you've got to put together a disclosure document that contains all this stuff that the SEC has said that it must contain. And you do file it with the SEC, but nobody there is looking at it. They don't look at it unless something goes wrong. So you file it, and then you can put it on your website and just run with it and start raising money. It's quick. You're not waiting for any regulatory review. And generally speaking, like I said, no regulator is looking at it. So what does that mean? That means a lot of companies aren't doing it correctly. So one organization, CrowdCheck, did a survey, did a study of financials, for example, of issuers doing Title III crowdfunding raises, and found that 40% of them don't meet the standards. They basically are not done correctly. So compliance has been very spotty. A platform called Seed Invest, I haven't independently verified this, but they purport to have very tough standards. You have to be a really solid company. Your disclosures have to be good and meet the standards to list there. They say that they've turned away a lot of companies that don't meet their standards. Those same companies, they show up on another crowdfunding platform. So be careful, particularly if you're an investor. Be very careful about investing in these. From an entrepreneur's point of view, yeah, it's still a good way to raise capital, but be aware that it's getting a little bit of a spotty reputation. Some people will be very skeptical of investing in any Title III raise. Now, what's good about it? Well, it allows you to raise up to $1 million, and you can raise money from investors in all 50 states. And as you'll see, other strategies don't allow you to do that. So that alone is a good thing. And you can do that, as I said, without having to wait for regulatory approval, so it can be a relatively quick and relatively easy way to raise up to $1 million. Now, one of the downsides of Title III crowdfunding is you do have to use a third-party portal. You cannot do it on your own website. The portal is regulated by FINRA, that's the financial regulator, and they typically charge 5 to 10% of the raise. So it may not be as cheap as it seems. You're going to end up paying for the listing to have it up on the portal, but if you want to raise less than $1 million and you have some time sensitivity and you want to be able to reach investors in multiple states, particularly a lot of states, that could very well be the best strategy for you. Yeah. Well, the question is, what are the charges? What we have seen is these portals typically charge between 5 and 10% of the raise. It's a success fee. They can take a success fee. They're typically a licensed broker-dealer, so they can legally do that. Pardon me? Okay, so here's the thing. Yes, but the rules, the SEC wants you to have all information on the portal. So if you're using, whatever it is, Start Engine or Seed Invest, you basically have to have all communications about the offering on the portal. So you can't really sit down and have a substantive conversation with potential investors over lunch or even at a meeting unless that conversation is being literally recorded and placed on the portal so that everybody can hear the same information. They're very, the rules are pretty strict about not having any information divulged off of the portal. So in a sense, it can be very limiting in how you communicate with your investor, with potential investors. But you can advertise it. So you can put it up on your website and say, we are doing a Title III crowdfunding raise. Go to this website. That's the way you would do it. You send them to the website, the portal website, not your own website. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, can you raise money through other channels while you're doing a Title III crowdfunding raise? And that's a really good question because in securities law, there is this principle of integration. And if you have two different offerings going on at the same or similar time, they could be treated as one single offering. That's the idea of integration of the offering. And you could find yourself with an offering that doesn't meet the requirements for any legal strategy, and you could have a problem on your hands. So it's a really good question to ask. The answer, however, is that generally speaking, with Title III crowdfunding, it doesn't integrate. And it's simply because the SEC built that rule, sort of a safe harbor kind of thing, into the crowdfunding rules, into the Title III rules. So they do say you can do another kind of offering. For example, you can, now we haven't talked yet about direct public offerings, but in a minute we'll talk about an intrastate direct public offering where you're raising in a registered offering in one state where all of your investors in that offering are in one state. You can raise an unlimited amount of money, regulated by the state legislator or state regulators. At least in theory, you can do that while you're also doing a Title III offering to raise money from the other 49 states. Now, you'd have to do that very, very carefully, but the answer to your question really is yes. But check with your lawyer and make sure you don't screw it up. It'd be easy to make a mistake and actually have something that you do in one offering violate the rules for the other offering. So be very careful about it. Okay, probably good enough on that. The point there is that this is a risky area, so proceed cautiously. Okay, so now we get into direct public offerings. And full disclosure, this is mostly what my firm does, so I have a little bit of a bias in favor of this category that we call direct public offerings. What is it? Well, it is, and the SEC uses this term regional offerings to mean kind of the same thing as a direct public offering. But what it means basically, the direct part refers to the fact that there's no intermediary. You're not using some third-party portal. You're not using a broker-dealer or an underwriter. You're doing an offering directly. It can be on your own website. It can be, advertised and so on. The public offering part is, well, again, it's the idea that you can use what in the securities laws they call general solicitation. The idea is you don't have to have a pre-existing relationship with someone. You can advertise it, put it openly on your website, and talk to crowds of people that you've never met. You don't have to know the people that you're offering it to. It's a true public offering. Now, under that term, there actually are about 3 different strategies that we use, well, about 4 different strategies that we use to do direct public offerings. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute, but generally speaking, one strategy is for nonprofits. Charitable organizations have their own exemption. And by the way, I should maybe pause for a moment. When I talk about exemptions, should have said this early on perhaps, but what we're talking about is exemptions from the securities laws that would ordinarily require you to register an offering before you can offer. In other words, if you're going out and offering an investment opportunity to people, the default rule is that it must be registered with securities regulators, and at the federal level, that's the SEC. At the state level, that's, well, in California, it's the Department of Business Oversight. It's different in every state. Unless there's an exemption. And registration process, at least at the SEC level, is very burdensome and expensive, requires audited financials and so on. You generally don't want to do that unless you're talking about a $100 million company. And I'll get to a timeline showing like what offerings are appropriate at different stages in a few minutes. But the point here is that we talk about exemption strategies, and these are all ways of of not having to register with the SEC. That's typically what we mean by that. Now, registering at the state level is not nearly as difficult or burdensome as registering at the federal level. So most of the strategies that we use that fit under the term direct public offering are actually registered at the state level, but not at the federal level. So it's easier and it can be cost effective, even though, as I say here, it's not really that well known a strategy. But at any rate, the advantages of it, and this can be a double-edged sword. One advantage is that it is fully reviewed and vetted by the regulators. Now, on one hand, that takes a little bit more time and sometimes can cost a bit more. But in terms of credibility of an offering, you're talking about something that the regulators have spent some time. They have scrutinized it carefully, and the regulators get comfortable with it. Now, that doesn't mean they've approved it in the sense of endorsing, but they have vetted it, and if they saw a problem, they don't hesitate to tell you so. So that can be an advantage for those who are looking for, investors who might otherwise be skeptical of fully exempt offerings like Title III. And then, of course, unlike Title III, you can market freely. So under Title III, as I said, all communications have to happen via the third-party portal. You can't really have one-on-one conversations. With a direct public offering, you can. You can sit down and talk to people. You can meet with people offline. And as long as you're providing all investors with all material information, you can have those conversations. It has a community focus, because generally speaking, what we're talking about here, and this is probably true to some degree of all crowdfunding offerings, but perhaps more so with a direct public offering, is it's community focused. Now, the reason why I say it's more so here is because if you're putting something on a national portal, you're really kind of making an offering to everyone in the country, all 350 million people in the country. But when you're doing a direct public offering, you can target your audience more specifically. We have a project, for example, one client that's raising capital for a real estate fund in Fresno, California. And he specifically wants to raise money from Fresno residents. This fund is going to acquire, renovate, rundown properties in the downtown central commercial district. And the idea is that our client wants the residents of the city of Fresno to be able to own a piece of their own commercial core and to profit from it. So he's specifically targeting Fresno residents as investors. It's definitely got a community feel, and most of the projects that our firm works with have some sort of community behind them. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a geographic community. Sometimes it's a dispersed community, like, some education or biodynamic agriculture or whatever that may be. So community doesn't necessarily mean geographic community, but ideally there is a community behind it, and that's who you're tapping into. Yes, you can choose who to market. The question is, can you select your investors? You can choose who you want to market it to. You can direct your marketing efforts to the community that you want to invest. You can also specifically say, no, I don't want this guy's money. Now, why would you do that? Well, if they're a competitor, for example, yeah, you can say, I'm not allowing any competitor to invest in my company. Yes, you can do that. In terms, I'm not going to talk too much detail about the process itself, but just briefly, when you're doing this kind of an offering, you market it, you put it out there. The key document that is the offering document is what you generally call a prospectus or offering memorandum or something, one of those terms. And a potential investor reads that. If they want to invest, they sign a subscription agreement. They sign it. They send it to you with a check, usually. And then it lands in your lap, and you go, yes or no. I'll accept him into my company, and I'll countersign the subscription agreement, and I'll take that check, or no, and I'll send it all back. That's fine. You don't have to, well, you got to send the check back too, yeah. Right. So anyway, so there's key advantages of a direct public offering. There are some disadvantages, and again, being fully vetted by regulators can cut both ways. It can be an advantage, but it can also take a little bit longer, and it might cost a little bit more. Not necessarily, but sometimes does. Yeah.
So are there any minimums or maximums and things?
Okay, good question. The per investor minimum. The question is, are there minimums and maximums per investor? Generally speaking, it's whatever you, as an entrepreneur who's designing the offering, it's whatever you want it to be. You can set the minimum, you can set the maximum. There usually isn't any maximum except for, well, there are some limits. General suitability standards suggest that you don't want someone investing more than 10% of their net worth in a particular offering. So in a sense, that sets the maximum, but it's no predetermined amount. You don't have to have any maximum amount. You can if you want, but you don't have to set any maximum amount. If someone wants to come in and say, yeah, I'm in for $1 million, you don't have to turn that check away. The minimum is whatever you want it to be. I've seen minimums for as little as 100. I'm not sure I'd recommend a minimum that small. Generally 1,000 or maybe 2,000 or even 5,000 is a better number.
What's the maximum?
Oh, okay. Maximum for the strategy. Okay. That gets into, actually, let me hold that because I'll talk about that in a minute. I think that's coming up next. Because that's the updates have changed that. So let's talk about what's changed or what's new in direct public offerings. Now, the first thing, and I've got a couple of slides in a minute that go into more detail, so let me just mention it. The SEC, that is the federal securities regulator, the Securities Exchange Commission, has issued some newly revised rules to make it easier to conduct direct public offerings. So they want to see more of these. And now this was, by the way, was under the old administration. We have no indication that the new administration is going to be any less friendly to direct public offerings. But I'll get into the details in a minute. But just briefly, there's no consolidated data. There's probably no way for me to tell you how many direct public offerings there are in any given year because as far as we know, nobody consolidates that. Nobody tracks all that data. I can tell you that our firm has a site, or a sister site, Cutting Edge X, that lists the DPOs that we know of. Right now, there are 11 direct public offerings live on Cutting Edge X. Some of those are charitable loan funds, and the real estate fund in Fresno that I mentioned, and 7 other entrepreneurial organizations, some for-profit and some nonprofit that are doing direct public offerings. Other than those, there's not a lot of data out there on the usage of this strategy, partly because there's multiple strategies wrapped into one, or under one umbrella term. So let's get into the recent changes. Let's see. Let's first talk about the intrastate. And the one that has the cap change, that's the one I'll talk about next. That's Rule 504. But first, let's talk about the intrastate. The intrastate strategy, again, this is a type of direct public offering. And there are several types, but this is one of the key types, probably the one that we use most. It is a strategy that basically says, if you're based in California, your company is based in California, and you're making an offering to California residents, essentially it's no business of the federal government. So you have an exemption from federal regulation. There's not even a filing to make. You're totally off the radar as far as the SEC goes. It is registered with the California regulators, or if you're in another state, it's whatever state regulators they have there. Now, it used to be that they had some rather strict rules about what it takes to qualify for the intrastate strategy. Not, I said you have to be based here, but what does it mean to be based here? It used to be that you had to have 80% of your revenues from your, the business in your state, and 80% of your assets had to be in the state, and 80% of your offering proceeds need to be used in connection with your business in the state in order to qualify for this strategy. Now, under these new rules that actually don't go into effect until next month, but under the new rules, any one of those will qualify you. Plus, they added a fourth one, simply having a majority of your employees in the state. That will make you qualified to do an intrastate offering in California. So they've significantly made it easier to use the intrastate strategy. Now, there are a couple of other things that they did. These are probably a little bit more technical. Maybe we don't worry about those. But here's a significant one. The integration rule is easy. It used to be that if you're going to do an intrastate offering and you were doing a private placement to raise some money for maybe your friends and family raise, or some institutions or VC firms, and then you want to do a public offering, you had to wait 6 months in between to avoid that integration problem I mentioned earlier. Now they basically created this safe harbor that says you can do a private placement up until the day before you start your direct public offering. So that makes it easier too. Okay. And one final thing on the new rules under this strategy. It used to be that you had to be incorporated in the state of your offering. So for example, in California, you'd have to be a California corporation or California LLC. Now, you don't even have to be incorporated here. So a lot of companies, of course, are Delaware companies or whatever they are. Massachusetts, Nevada, Delaware is most common. And it used to be that disqualified you from using the strategy. Now it does not anymore disqualify you. So again, they've made it easier to use. Okay, so that's this intrastate strategy. Now, they've also changed the rules. Oh, by the way, one other thing on that. Back to the intrastate, sorry. There is no limit to how much money you can raise. There is no limit. You can raise $1 billion under this strategy as long as all your investors are in California. Now, when we get to Rule 504, now, this addresses sort of one essential problem with the intrastate strategy, that all your investors in that offering have to be from the same state. What if you have investors in multiple states? Well, Rule 504 is the rule that you can use for a multi-state or regional offering. You can cross state lines. You would have to register in each state where your investors are. But you can do that in as many different states as you want to. It is good, by the way, going to cost a little bit more for each state where you register. If you're talking about 10 states, it can get a little bit expensive. But at any rate, You can raise up to, what it used to be, you could raise up to $1 million, from investors in multiple states. 1 million wasn't that much, and a lot of entrepreneurs just, that didn't work. It didn't work. So the SEC did just change this in January to increase it from 1 million to 5 million. They also added this, what they call bad actor rules. Probably don't need to go into detail about that, but suffice to say, if you've got someone with a criminal conviction or something on your management team, you probably need to get them off their management team if you're going to use this strategy. Although if that happened before the new rules went into effect, all you got to do is disclose it. All right. Okay, so that's the Rule 504. So that's the big news is the SEC has issued these rules to make it easier to use both the intrastate strategy and the Rule 504 strategy. Now, the other big new strategy, I should say, that came out of the Jobs Act is this Regulation A+. This one has also gotten a lot of publicity, and it's actually not a new exemption. Reg A has always been there, but they revised it and increased the cap from 5 million to now 50 million. So that made it a lot more useful. It's essentially a mini registration. So unlike all the other strategies I've been talking about, which were under an exemption from SEC registration, this one isn't so much an exemption from SEC registration as more of a scaled back registration. So you are filing fairly comprehensive documents with the SEC, and it's a little bit more work than doing, say, an intrastate DPO. But if you want to raise money from investors in multiple states, and you don't want to be subject to that $5 million cap of Rule 504, this is the one to use, because you can now go up to 50 million, and you can raise money from investors in all 50 states. Now, there are two tiers. Tier 1, and by the way, this went into effect, I didn't put the date on here, but it's been about a year and a half. It was not this past summer, but the summer before. Summer of 2015, I think this went into effect. Let's see, I won't get into two tiers, 1 and 2. I don't want to get too technical on this. You do have to have audited financials. So in several respects, it's more like doing a traditional SEC registration, but not as burdensome. And here's one big benefit. Benefit or burden, depending on how you look at it. For most of these strategies I've been talking about, even if it does involve some notice filed with the SEC, all these things, whether it's an intrastate or Rule 504 or even the Title III crowdfunding, you don't thereby become an SEC reporting company. So you're not filing a 10K, a 10Q, 8K current report, all that stuff that public companies have to file. All the companies up until this one, all the strategies I've been talking about so far still allow you to be essentially a privately held company, even though you've done a direct public offering. Now, this one is a little bit of an exception because, as I said, this is almost like a mini registration with the SEC. Now, as you may know, if you did a full registration with the SEC, that's the Form S1 registration that you do when you do an IPO, you become a reporting company. That means you've got all this compliance burden. So the cost is not just the cost of getting that initial audit and filing all your SEC papers and so on. The cost is ongoing. Every year you may spend $250,000 on compliance costs as a reporting company. Now, under Reg A, it's sort of in line with the idea that the registration process is a little bit like a mini registration, similar but scaled back. The same thing with ongoing reporting. So if you're doing a Reg A offering, you will have ongoing reporting obligations to the SEC. Instead of a quarterly filing, you're going to do a semi-annual filing. But you still have to also do the annual filing. You also have to do a current report. So it increased your cost burden quite a bit. But if you need to raise 50 million or under, or something in that range, it can be the best strategy. So now, updates. So as I said, this is fairly new. So this went into effect, June 2015. I did put the date on. During the period from June until October, which is sort of the most recent date for which I saw some data, there were 147 filings, 87 of which were approved by the SEC. So of those other, 60-some, that doesn't mean that they were disapproved. That may mean that they're simply in process. And presumably some of those will continue to be approved. But $190 million was reported raised during that period. Average offering amount of 18 million. So this is getting well used. A lot of usage of this strategy. Interestingly, most of them were early stage startups, and a lot of them, I think a majority of them, had little or no revenue at the time they did the offering. So it really is a strategy that works or has been used by true startups. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, this company, MedX, got suspended just by way of enforcement action. It's new enough that there hasn't been a lot of enforcement activity. Over time, there will be more enforcement activity, but it's interesting that this one company did get suspended for failing to file some reports, but they were in the cannabis business, and so some have speculated that that's the real reason they got suspended, because the SEC is skeptical about cannabis. But anyway, that's the update on that. I expect we'll see a lot more enforcement activity here in the next year or so. Oh, intermediary. Okay, by that I mean a third-party portal. So. Actually, thank you for asking that question. I know I need to wrap this up here in a minute or two. I'm almost done. But the reason I put Reg A plus, people say Reg A or Reg A plus, it means the same thing, by the way. The reason I put this on its own slide and not simply as part of a direct public offering is because you can do a direct public offering or via Reg A, which simply means that you're not using a broker-dealer or underwriter, or you can use one of those intermediaries. So you don't have to do it as a direct public offering. You can do it in a fully underwritten, approach. And so that's what I mean by intermediary. An intermediary is a broker-dealer who is helping you bring in investors, who is going to take a commission. So it's not a true direct public offering if you're using an intermediary, because it's not direct. You're using that intermediary, broker-dealer firm, underwriter, to help find investors. And like I said, statistically in that period, 36% of them used intermediary, and the rest presumably did it, directly on their website and so on. Oh, who are the investors? The question is, who are the investors in these offerings? It's anybody. Now, with all of these strategies that I've talked about, except for that first one I talked about, accredited crowdfunding, which I called an oxymoron. With all these strategies, your investors can be anyone. They do not have to be accredited. Regular folks. Pardon me? Yes, there is. Well, yes. So, okay, there's actually two questions in there. Do they need to be U.S. citizens? No, they do not. Anyone can, of any nationality or origin can invest in any of these offerings. Now, the question of can you offer it in other countries is a different question. That's another story, and that actually gets into some different regulations. The short answer is yes, you can do some of these things in other countries, but it involves other regulations other than these. So Reg A doesn't apply to an offering in, say, China or England. You're using a different strategy if you want to go do an offering outside the country. Generally speaking, by the way, in the securities world, you have to comply with the securities laws of the place where your investors reside. So if you're doing an offering in England, you've got to pay attention to what are the UK securities laws. And that's not my area of expertise. I couldn't tell you what UK securities laws are. But okay, almost done here, and then we're going to get to more Q&A. Okay, I want to kind of wrap things up by showing you sort of in summary fashion kind of a timeline of what strategies make sense and what What stage of a company? Now, this is very rough, okay? So, there are exceptions to all these. But, breaking down the timeline of a company into, the original idea, and then you form an entity, then you have some successful prototype, and then you have your first sale, and then 100,000 in sales, 1 million, 10 million, and so on. So, think of that as the timeline of a company. What are the strategies that work at different stages? So self-funding or bootstrapping, that's obviously what people use at the very beginning. And for a lot of folks, that can take you as far as you want it to go, because, once you get to the point where you're generating enough profits to fuel growth, you can reach 100 million self-funding. But not, that doesn't happen very often. Now, donations, rewards, and so on, that probably becomes viable sometime after you've passed the idea stage, maybe when you get into the entity stage. The darkest bars sort of represent the sweet spot. So maybe you do donations, rewards, pre-sale crowdfunding when you've got a prototype that's successful and you're gearing up for your first sale. Private offering to friends and family. Maybe it starts around the same era. If you're talking to, your friends who are willing to take a bet on you, they may invest as soon as you form an entity. And they may carry you through, up until you reach $1 million in sales if you've got some rich friends. At some point, your friends and family are probably going to peter out. Now, private money from angels and institutions, well, again, there's exceptions to all these things, but you might think of that as starting out. Probably no angel is going to invest in you if you don't have a successful prototype. So I have it starting there, although maybe it's a little fuzzier than that. And private money can take you, all the way. There's no end. A lot of very, very big companies, billion-dollar companies, are privately financed. So there's no end on that. Title III crowdfunding. You could probably start it maybe a little bit earlier than I have it there, but generally speaking, when you're talking about a marketing campaign, it's going to be hard to convince a lot of people to invest if you don't even have a prototype, or if you haven't had your first sale. So I have it starting out somewhere between a prototype and your first sale is when you can start doing a crowdfunding campaign on Title III. And then you hit your sweet spot there. It probably peters out once you get into the millions in sales, because after all, that strategy caps you at $1 million. So if you're selling $10 million of widgets, you probably don't need to raise $1 million in crowdfunding money. But at any rate, this is all rough. Now, the DPOs that I've talked about, the interest rate or the Rule 504, maybe starts just a shade later. It probably helps to have a first sale before you start one of those campaigns. Although I will say we have done successful direct public offerings for pre-revenue companies. That's not that unusual, but generally speaking, it's a challenging offering to market if you don't have if you're pre-revenue. But it can be done, and those can carry through well into the 100 million range. Now, Reg A, I have it starting at roughly the same time. Maybe it should go up. It kind of depends on how you think of it, but that probably becomes viable around the same time. Now, an IPO, because an IPO with a traditional S1 registration probably has no advantage over a Reg A unless you need to raise over 50 million. I have that starting later. Not that you couldn't do it earlier, but if you're raising under 50 million, don't do an S1 registration. Do a Reg A. So anyway, that's a very rough timeline. Hopefully that's helpful. And by the way, if anyone wants, I can email you, this whole deck if anyone wants to have this for reference. So I think that's all I had. So
let's hear it for Brian.
Thank you.
So if you'd like the slides, email Brian directly. Now we're entering the formal Q&A session. So if you have a question, walk up to the microphone, speak clearly into the mic. If you have a follow-up question, stay there till you're done. That way, viewers of the video can hear the question and the answer. Go for it.
Okay.
All right.
All right. This is the dark side. How do we deal with rogue backers who refuse to follow terms of service and misuse the legal system to change their mind after a funding has closed, to just demand their money back even though fulfillment, product, and everything is available? There's a case against me where a disgruntled backer just doesn't want his lights, has lied his ass off. He has some connection with the court. He's filed in a wrong jurisdiction, a foreign jurisdiction. He's filed against a non-existent entity, all sorts of flaws. But nevertheless, he's shoving this through an excessively friendly court that's issuing wrong judgments. So how do we address, are there precedent, in the form of an exact question, is there a specific known precedent that basically told a disgruntled backer to go to hell?
Well, so this is not so much a securities law question, but more of a contract question. So that's a little bit not exactly in my area of expertise, but I would say, to avoid this kind of thing happening in the future, you may want to maybe have a good attorney look at your documentation. And
you assume people can afford lawyers at certain stages.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, that is you're right. That is a challenge. I mean, you want to have good documentation, but it may be hard to come up with the money to get good documentation.
This guy's defying basics of litigation and getting away with it.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't do litigation, so that's kind of outside of my area.
Haven't you seen a situation somewhere where an investor, after they invested their money, deal is closed, that they just said, oh, I want my money back, like something isn't paying off as quickly or it isn't paying off,
well,
they said they want their money back?
Okay, so when you first described the problem, it sounded like you're talking about some sort of a pre-sale arrangement. They're buying a product before it's able to be shipped?
Yeah, except that Kickstarter is not sales. This was a Kickstarter that's known, and Kickstarter has very definite rules. Kickstarter sent me a very specific statement to present to the court that this backer is not entitled to anything, and they gave this asshole a judgment anyway. Now I'm considered a bad actor. I can't renew my E&O, D&O, and GPL insurances because the premiums are shooting up through the roof because we got this scumbag that if murder were legal, I would have killed him a long time ago.
Well, so first of all,
really is trying to ruin my life, but there's basic law. There's got to be some basic law, some precedent that basically, because it's all established, it's almost like common sense to you, to me, to everybody, that you put your money in a Kickstarter, there's no guarantee of anything.
Yeah, so this is not a securities law question. It's really more of a contract question. And I don't think this makes you a bad actor for purposes of the Rule 504, because it's not just, just simply having a judgment against you does not disqualify you from using Rule 504. So I don't think that needs to be an issue of whether it's affected your insurance premium.
Oh yeah, no, this is dead serious.
Okay, what I would really recommend is that you get an attorney to help you out.
I mean, there's a business that has nothing to do with a Kickstarter, but he's attacking the whole business.
Yeah, so that's super frustrating. I think you probably need to get an attorney to help defend you in the case.
Do you know one who can just make this guy's life as miserable as possible?
Talk to him offline.
I'd have to think. I don't do litigation, so I'd have to think about it.
Next question.
What's the legal cost and filing cost of Reg A or A+?
For one of these strategies we've been talking about? Reg A? Generally speaking, you could probably expect the legal fees to run about $50,000. The filing cost maybe a couple thousand, like the SEC filing costs. So, it varies according to different strategies. Some of the other strategies are going to cost less. For example, an intrastate offering may be as little as $25,000 or $30,000. Reg A is going to be more expensive because there's more, it's an SEC process. It varies according to the strategy. But anyway, that might be a ballpark.
Yeah, I had a similar question. If I wanted to do a DPO, it would be a typical startup time, cost to get it started. And secondly, Do you have any normal exit strategies? What do people expect from a DPO?
Okay, so let me answer that question first. Exit strategy, that's a really good question. Everybody asks about exit strategies. And a few months ago, I actually wrote an article, a blog, basically post on our website about this. So if you look on our website and look for exit strategies on our blog page, there's an article that lists a good dozen or so. The short answer is there's several types of exit strategies you can have. There are some that are built into the security that you're offering. So as an entrepreneur, you can offer a debt instrument that matures at 5, 7, whatever years. You can offer revenue share security that basically gives people, say, double their money back or some multiple. But once they've gotten their money back, it expires. So it's got a built-in exit. So that's one type. There are other types of exits where, if a company is acquired or it goes public, it does, later does an IPO and lists on a stock exchange, then that sort of creates its own built-in exit as well. So there's those, and those have happened to companies like Ben & Jerry's, was bought by Unilever, I think. Annie's Homegrown was bought by Nestle, I think, after doing a direct public offering. And then if none of those are going on, if none of those are available, you can still, as an investor in a direct public offering, you can still sell your investment. You just can't sell it in any kind of a public way. You can't, put it on Facebook and say, hey, I want to sell 100 shares of XYZ company. Does anyone want to buy them? That would be illegal because you can't market it that way. But if you, sitting down in conversation with someone and say, hey, I got 100 shares of XYZ, are you interested? And they say, yeah, I'll buy them. There you go. That's no problem. So you can sell them. But remember, when you do these strategies, other than the Reg A that I talked about, under any of these strategies, you're still a privately held company. So don't think of this as taking you public. You are not going public. You are raising capital in a public way, but you are still a privately held company. So all those same rules apply as to any other privately held company.
And then the first question, the typical lead time.
Oh, timeline. Okay. It varies a lot. So under Title III, basically you put together your disclosure documents, you post it, and you go. That can take very little time. When we do a direct public offering, it takes a period of months, and here's why. There's really kind of 3 phases to the offering. Think of it as this way. There are 3 phases. Phase 1 is you're preparing your documents, and we do this very carefully because this is all going to be fully vetted by the regulators. You want to make sure all material facts are disclosed in the offering documents. So typically, it may take 3 months to pull all the different resources together and get your definitive documents ready to go and package it together with an application to the regulators. Once we submit it to the regulators, then you start phase 2, which is the regulators are looking at it when they get around to it, and they give some feedback. They may say, we want to change this or change that or increase the suitability standards or add a disclosure. And then, so there's some back and forth. That process can take 2 to 3 months. And then phase 3 is once the regulators issue a permit to launch your offering, now you market it. So, how long it takes you to market your offering kind of depends on how much resources you have to put into your marketing campaign. But start to finish, you might expect the process to take 6 to 9 months to have money in your hands.
Thank you.
About the DPO, I was wondering what kind of companies it applies to, including what kind of funds it might, can we raise money for a fund that invests in bootstrapping startups?
Okay, very good question. So what kind of company can do a direct public offering? Any kind of company, any industry, any type of entity, LLC, corporation. You can be in tech, you can be in agriculture, you can be a brewery. There's really no limit there. What is a key, not from a legal standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, is that there be some community that you can reach out to. Now, they don't have to be in your Rolodex, literally, but if there is some community out there that you think would support you with their money, that's your target community. So it really helps to have, a group, some kind of affinity group out there to reach. But otherwise, any kind of company can do a direct public offering. Now, you're asking about a fund. That actually is a really interesting topic, and I've done some writing on this topic. And if you're interested, again, go to our blog page on cuttingedgecapital.com, and there's several articles about funds, which personally I'm excited about because I think that's a way to help move the needle faster toward a more democratic, inclusive, and equitable economy. So I really believe in the power of funds. Now, when you're talking about a fund, and by a fund I mean an entity that's raising capital via some securities offering, some investment offering into the fund, and then in turning around and investing it in other companies. So just to be clear what I mean by a fund. When you have a fund, you not only need to comply with all, one of these strategies on the offering side when you're raising investment capital, but now you also, as a separate layer of regulation, you need to comply with the Investment Company Act of 1940, an federal securities law that regulates funds specifically, or what they call investment companies, same thing. And it is a very burdensome set of laws that require you to jump through a lot of hoops, including full SEC registration, unless, again, you find an exemption. So the key is to find an exemption that works. There are a number of exemptions that can work depending on what you want to do. So check out the blogs on our website if you're interested in doing a fund. And if you don't see something that describes what you want to do, give me a call. We'll talk.
Would these resemble a limited partnership?
It could. I mean, a partnership is just one kind of entity. So yeah, an LLC, a limited partnership.
Like a VC fund or the Berkshire type?
Yeah. So the real estate fund I mentioned in Fresno is a limited liability company. It could have been set up as a limited partnership, but we just did it as an LLC. But yeah, that's no problem.
Thank you.
Sure.
A couple of quick questions. First is in the DPO situation, interstate or intrastate has no limits to how much you raise.
No limit to how much you can raise, that's correct.
Interstate has or multi-state has a $5 million.
Yes, the 504 has $5 million limit.
So what if you're doing both?
Okay, so you don't want to do both because you have that integration problem.
Okay,
now,
but if you want to do California and New York only together.
Okay, if you want to do California and New York, you want to use the 504 strategy. And that's got the $5 million aggregate cap, not per state, but aggregate total. Now, if you want to do 2 states and you want to raise more than $5 million, well, then we got to do a little bit of brainstorming to figure out what's the strategy. You could do a sequential offering, because as I said earlier, the SEC's new intrastate rules basically say that any kind of offering preceding an intrastate offering won't be integrated with the offering. So you could do a Rule 504 offering in 2 or 3 or more states, and then do an intrastate offering in California, and it won't be integrated. So we can figure out a strategy that works for you.
Okay. Second question is regarding the A-plus companies that have raised money without revenue. Do they typically have to have a patent or some other IP or something to back it up? Or?
No, they don't have to have anything. It's just a question of why would somebody invest if you don't have some protectable technology or protectable IP. But, I mean, IP isn't necessarily the whole thing. So one of those companies that raised capital, I think the first or one of the first was a company called Elio Motors. Probably have all heard of them. They're this little 3-wheel motorcycle, not motorcycle, but car company. And I think that they were pre-revenue. I don't think they'd ever sold a product, but that they raised several $1 million. And, did they have some patented technology? I don't know. You don't have to use Reg A, but it sure helps when again, it's a marketing challenge. It would help to say we have this patented technology.
Okay. Just one more quick thing from the previous questioner. If the fund is not a fund, but a Berkshire Hathaway-like public company of the future, in other words, it's not to be registered as a fund, would that make any difference? Or you still have to go through the process of registering as a fund?
Well, interesting that you mentioned Berkshire Hathaway. You would think that they should be regulated as an investment company under the 1940 Act, but they're not because, and if I remember this correctly, so there are several exemptions from the 1940 Act. I believe they use the exemption that says if not more, this gets technical, so I'll forgive you if your eyes glaze over, but if not more than 40% of your assets comprise something called investment securities, then you won't be covered by the Investment Company Act, and they define investment securities to exclude majority-owned positions. So Berkshire Hathaway tends to invest mostly in majority positions, and that takes them out of the 1940 Act.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
And by the way, you could do that too. You could be the Berkshire Hathaway of Silicon Valley.
I have a very basic question, right? I mean, when you raise money, right? In crowdfunding scenario, as Indiegogo, you give product to them. In an angel scenario, you actually have some cap or discount and you give equity to them, right? This seems to be one where probably you give equity to your investors. Right?
It's anything you want. Now, other than peer-to-peer lending, which is specifically lending, and I didn't talk much about the charitable loan fund, which, again, deals only in debt. But other than those, all of these other strategies work no matter what kind of security you're offering. And by kind of security, I mean exactly this. It can be debt. It can be an investment note that pays, 5% interest and is due in 10 years. Or it can be equity, which could be common voting stock. It can be non-voting preferred stock that with a, 5% preferential dividend. Or you can, there's a lot of flexibility. You can craft it, if you're dealing with preferred stock, you can have a redemption option, you can have a conversion option, if you want it. It's, as the entrepreneur, you decide what you want to offer. And it can be something else. It can be a revenue share. You can say, for every, 10,000 you invest, I'm going to give you, 0.1% of my top line revenue until you get double your money back, or something like that. You can get creative. So it doesn't matter. When it comes to the securities laws, these are all different types of securities. And I don't know if I defined that term, but security is just a word that means any investment. So these are all investments, and they're all covered by the same securities laws, no matter what type of security they are.
Thanks.
Sure. All right, are we good?
Any more questions for Brian? All right, let's give it up for Brian.
All right, thank you.